Let the darkness envelop you. Let the sound of the rain wash away the worries of the day. And prepare to enter a world where the stories come alive. The Darkscreen Chronicles. A world where the screen fades to black and the imagination takes flight. A world where anything is possible and nothing is quite as it seems. The hum of the tires against the asphalt was a constant, low drone, the only sound competing with the rush of wind against the car. Miles of blacktop unspooled before Sarah's headlights, a ribbon of pale light against the vast, inky canvas of the night. She'd decided to take the back roads, a shortcut her grandfather had sworn by. But now, hours later, she regretted it. The GPS signal was weak, flickering in and out, and the emptiness of the road was starting to gnaw at her. Then she saw them. 2 pinpricks of light in her rearview mirror, far back, barely visible. She hadn't seen another car for what felt like an eternity. She checked her speedometer, 70 miles per hour, plenty fast. She glanced back again. The lights were closer, perceptibly so. She pressed down on the accelerator, the engine responding with a low growl. 75, then 80. She watched the rearview mirror, her pulse quickening. The lights were still gaining, slowly, relentlessly. It didn't make sense. She was going incredibly fast. A wave of unease washed over her. It wasn't the speed, or the darkness, or the isolation. It was the way the lights seemed to be, watching. She eased off the gas, just a little, and the lights slowed too, maintaining the same distance. They were matching her speed, perfectly. Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She couldn't see the car, just the lights, 2 luminous eyes staring at her from the darkness. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a truck, its high beams cutting through the night. But trucks weren't this quiet, and they didn't move like this. She decided to test it. She slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly before coming to a stop on the shoulder. She turned off the engine, plunging the car into silence. The headlights behind her did the same. She held her breath, listening. Nothing, just the wind, whispering through the tall grass beside the road. She strained her eyes, trying to pierce the darkness, but she couldn't see a thing. Then the lights flickered, once, twice, a faint, rhythmic pulse. It was as if they were blinking at her. A cold dread settled in her stomach. She fumbled for her phone, but the signal was gone. Just a blank screen. She started the car, her hands shaking. She switched on the high beams, flooding the road with light. But the car was gone. No lights, no sound, nothing. Just the empty road stretching into the darkness. She looked back, and in the far distance, she saw the lights again. They were further away, but they were still there, still watching. And then, as she watched, they vanished like someone had turned them off. Sarah drove the rest of the night, not stopping, not slowing, and not looking back. She never took those back roads again. The flickering fluorescent lights of the library basement cast long, dancing shadows across the towering bookshelves. Eleanor, a history graduate student, was alone, immersed in the musty scent of aging paper and forgotten knowledge. She'd been researching obscure local legends, drawn to a particularly unsettling tale about a book rumored to be cursed. The legend spoke of a grimoire, bound in human skin and filled with cryptic symbols, said to have been hidden within the library's collection centuries ago. Anyone who read from its pages, the story went, would be plagued by terrifying visions and driven to madness. Eleanor, initially skeptical, had become increasingly captivated by the legend, the line between academic curiosity and morbid fascination blurring with each passing hour. As the night deepened, she stumbled upon a hidden alcove, tucked away behind a shelf of crumbling encyclopedias. There, nestled amongst cobweb-laden volumes, was a leather-bound book, its cover strangely smooth and cold to the touch. Intrigued and apprehensive, Eleanor reached for the book, her fingers tracing the outline of a strange symbol embossed on its cover. As she opened the book, a gust of icy air swept through the alcove, extinguishing the lights and plunging her into darkness. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she felt a strange tingling sensation in her fingertips. Then she heard it, a faint whisper, seemingly emanating from the pages of the book. The whisper grew louder, morphing into a guttural chant that seemed to claw at the edges of her sanity. Terrified, Eleanor tried to close the book, but her hands wouldn't respond. They were frozen. Her fingers fused to the pages as if bound by an unseen force. The chanting intensified, and the symbols on the pages began to writhe and contort, forming grotesque shapes that danced before her eyes. Visions flooded her mind. Shadowy figures with burning eyes, landscapes of twisted flesh and bone, and rituals of unspeakable horror. Panic surged through her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She tried to scream, but her voice was trapped in her throat, choked by the growing terror. The visions intensified, swirling around her, threatening to consume her. Then, as suddenly as it began, the chanting stopped. The book fell from her numb fingers, its pages fluttering closed. The lights flickered back on, revealing the library basement, silent and undisturbed. Eleanor, trembling and drenched in a cold sweat, stumbled back from the alcove, her eyes wide with terror. She fled the library, the image of the book and the horrifying visions seared into her memory. The legend was true. The cursed book was real. And now she feared the visions would never leave her. The old Victorian house stood on a hill overlooking the town, its silhouette stark against the twilight sky. It had been empty for years, a decaying monument to a bygone era shrouded in local whispers and unsettling rumors. They said it was haunted, a place where the veil between the living and the dead was thin, where whispers echoed from empty rooms and shadows danced in the moonlight. One night, a group of teenagers, fueled by bravado and boredom, decided to explore the abandoned house. They were armed with flashlights and smartphones, ready to capture evidence of the supernatural, eager to prove the rumors true. As they crept through the overgrown yard, a sense of unease settled upon them. The air grew heavy, the silence pressing in on them, broken only by the creaking of old branches and the rustling of unseen creatures. They reached the front door, its paint peeling and cracked, and the brass knocker tarnished with age. With a hesitant push, the door creaked open, revealing a darkened hallway that seemed to stretch into infinity. The teenagers exchanged nervous glances, their bravado faltering in the face of the unknown. They stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the gloom, illuminating dust-covered furniture and cobweb-draped chandeliers. As they ventured deeper into the house, the temperature dropped, a chill that seeped into their bones. They heard the floorboards groan beneath their weight, the sound echoing through the empty rooms like the sighs of the long dead. Then they noticed the photographs. Faded portraits lined the walls, their subjects staring back with hollow eyes, their expressions frozen in a mixture of sadness and accusation. As the teenagers moved from room to room, the photographs seemed to follow them, their eyes tracking their every move. In the parlor, they found a gramophone, its horn tarnished and cracked. One of the teenagers, emboldened by a surge of recklessness, cranked the handle, and a scratchy waltz filled the room. As the music played, the shadows seemed to dance more vividly, swirling and twisting, as if figures were joining the waltz. A wave of panic swept through the group. They turned to flee, but the hallway seemed to stretch and distort, the exit growing further away with each step. The photographs on the walls now appeared grotesque, their subjects' faces contorted in agony, their eyes burning with malevolence. The music intensified, the waltz becoming a frantic, dissonant melody that clawed at their sanity. The teenagers stumbled through the house, their flashlights casting erratic beams that revealed glimpses of shadowy figures flitting at the edges of their vision. Then, as suddenly as it began, the music stopped. The house fell silent, the shadows receding into the corners. The teenagers, breathless and terrified, found themselves back at the front door, the exit now clearly visible. They fled into the night, the images of the house and the haunting melody seared into their memories. They never spoke of their experience again. The memory was too unsettling to revisit. The old Victorian house remained, a silent sentinel on the hill, its secrets whispered in the wind, waiting for the next unsuspecting visitor. The city was a labyrinth of concrete and steel, a symphony of noise and light that never slept. But beneath its vibrant surface, hidden in the forgotten corners and abandoned alleyways, there existed another world, a world of shadows and secrets. Mark, a young photojournalist, was drawn to the city's underbelly, fascinated by the stories that unfolded in the darkness. He spent his nights exploring the forgotten places, his camera capturing the hidden beauty and the unsettling truths that the city concealed. One night, while venturing into an abandoned subway tunnel, he stumbled upon a hidden door, concealed behind a crumbling wall. Curiosity piqued, he pushed the door open, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. He hesitated, a shiver of apprehension running down his spine, but the allure of the unknown was too strong to resist. He descended the stairs, his flashlight beam cutting through the thick gloom. The air grew heavy, laden with the scent of damp earth and decay. The walls were covered in graffiti, strange symbols, and cryptic messages that seemed to writhe and shift in the dim light. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, he found himself in a long, narrow corridor, its walls lined with rusted pipes and decaying wires. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the drip of water and the distant rumble of passing trains. He continued down the corridor, his unease growing with each step. The graffiti on the walls became more disturbing, depicting grotesque figures and scenes of unimaginable horror. He felt a growing sense of dread, a feeling that he was not alone. Then he saw it. At the end of the corridor, a faint light flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. As he approached, he realized it was a doorway, its frame warped and twisted, as if melted by intense heat. He peered through the doorway, his heart pounding in his chest. The room beyond was vast and cavernous, its walls lined with towering shelves that stretched into the darkness. But it was not the shelves that held his attention. It was the figures. Hundreds of figures, shrouded in shadow, stood motionless in the room. They were tall and slender, their limbs elongated, and their heads disproportionately small. Their eyes glowed with an eerie light, fixated on him with an intensity that made his blood run cold. Mark raised his camera, his finger hovering over the shutter button. He wanted to capture this scene, this unsettling tableau that defied explanation. But as he focused the lens, he noticed something even more disturbing. The figures were not solid. They were translucent, their forms shimmering and shifting like heat haze. And as he watched, they began to move towards him, their eyes burning with a hunger that chilled him to the core. He stumbled back, his camera falling to the ground with a clatter. He turned to flee, but the corridor seemed to stretch and distort, the exit growing further away with each step. The figures were closing in, their whispers echoing in his ears, their shadows enveloping him. He ran, his lungs burning and his heart pounding like a drum. But the figures were faster, their elongated limbs carrying them with an unnatural speed. He could feel their presence behind him, their cold breath on his neck. He reached the staircase, his legs screaming in protest. He scrambled up the steps, his hands slipping on the rusted railings. He could hear the figures closing in, their whispers growing louder, their shadows stretching up the stairs towards him. He burst through the hidden door, stumbling into the abandoned subway tunnel. He slammed the door shut, the sound echoing through the darkness. He leaned against the wall, gasping for breath, his body trembling with fear. He never returned to the tunnel. The memory of the figures and the whispering shadows was too terrifying to revisit. The city kept its secrets, hidden in the darkness, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to stumble upon them. The antique mirror had been a prized possession, passed down through generations of Emily's family. Its ornate frame was crafted from dark wood, etched with intricate carvings that hinted at forgotten rituals and whispered secrets. The glass itself was cloudy with age, its surface reflecting a distorted, ethereal image that seemed to shift and breathe with the flickering candlelight. Emily had always been drawn to the mirror, fascinated by its antique beauty and the unsettling feeling it evoked. She would spend hours gazing into its depths. Her imagination conjured visions of bygone eras and the faces of those who had gazed into its surface before her. One night, as a storm raged outside, Emily found herself drawn to the mirror once more. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows and sending shivers down her spine. The power flickered, plunging the room into darkness, save for the dancing flames of the candles that illuminated the mirror. As Emily gazed into the mirror, she noticed something strange. Her reflection was not quite right. It was subtle at first, a slight distortion in her features, a flicker in her eyes. But as she continued to stare, the differences became more pronounced. Her reflection's eyes seemed to darken, taking on a malevolent glint. Her smile twisted into a cruel smirk, and her skin grew pale and gaunt. A sense of dread washed over Emily, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to look away, but her gaze was locked on the mirror, as if held captive by an unseen force. The reflection began to move independently, its lips forming words that Emily couldn't hear, but could somehow understand. It spoke of ancient powers, of dark rituals, and of a world beyond the mirror's surface. Emily felt a pull towards the mirror, a desire to step through the glass and into the world that beckoned her. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing against the cold surface of the mirror. As she touched the glass, a surge of energy pulsed through her body, and the room around her dissolved into a swirling vortex of colors and shapes. Emily gasped, her eyes wide with fear and wonder. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and then, with a final surge of energy, it shattered, the fragments dissolving into dust. Emily found herself standing in a different room, a dimly lit chamber with walls lined with shelves of ancient books and strange artifacts. She was no longer alone. A figure stood before her, tall and imposing, its features obscured by shadow. It spoke in a voice that resonated deep within her soul, welcoming her to a world of shadows and secrets. Emily, terrified and intrigued, realized she had stepped through the mirror into a world beyond her wildest imaginings. The antique mirror, a gateway to the unknown, had revealed its true purpose, and Emily was now bound to a destiny she could not comprehend. The old grandfather clock had been a fixture in the living room for as long as Ben could remember. Its rhythmic ticking was a constant presence, marking the passage of time with each measured swing of its pendulum. But as the years passed, the clock began to exhibit strange behavior, its gears grinding and its chimes echoing at odd hours. Ben, a skeptic by nature, dismissed the anomalies as the quirks of an aging mechanism. But as the clock's behavior grew more erratic, a sense of unease began to creep into his rational mind. The ticking seemed to accelerate and decelerate at random, the chimes echoing with a mournful tone that sent shivers down his spine. One night, as Ben lay in bed, unable to sleep, he heard the grandfather clock strike 13. He sat up, his heart pounding in his chest. 13 chimes. It was impossible. The clock only had 12. He crept downstairs, his bare feet silent on the carpet. The living room was bathed in moonlight, the grandfather clock casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. As he approached the clock, he noticed something strange. The pendulum was swinging erratically, its arc growing wider and wider with each swing. He reached out a hesitant hand, his fingers brushing against the cold metal of the clock's frame. As he touched it, a surge of energy pulsed through his body, and the room around him dissolved into a swirling vortex of colors and shapes. Ben gasped, his eyes wide with disbelief. The grandfather clock, its gears grinding and its chimes echoing, was no longer just a timepiece. It was a portal, a gateway to another dimension, a world where time was fluid and reality was malleable. He found himself standing in a strange, alien landscape, the sky a swirling mass of colors, and the ground a shifting expanse of impossible shapes. He was surrounded by creatures unlike any he had ever seen, their forms shifting and changing, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. Ben, terrified and intrigued, realized he had stumbled into a world beyond his comprehension, a world where the laws of physics were bent and the boundaries of reality were blurred. The grandfather clock, a relic of a bygone era, had revealed its true purpose, and Ben was now a traveler in a realm of infinite possibilities. The abandoned amusement park stood on the outskirts of town, a decaying monument to childhood dreams and forgotten laughter. Its rusted Ferris wheel loomed against the skyline, its faded carousel horses frozen in mid-gallop, and its haunted house stood silent, its doors creaking in the wind. Locals whispered of strange occurrences within the park's boundaries, of ghostly laughter echoing through the empty pathways, of spectral figures glimpsed among the dilapidated rides, and of a lingering sense of unease that clung to the air like cobwebs. One night, a group of friends, drawn by the allure of the forbidden and the thrill of the unknown, decided to explore the abandoned amusement park. Armed with flashlights and a healthy dose of skepticism, they ventured past the rusted gates and into the overgrown grounds. As they navigated the maze of crumbling pathways, a sense of foreboding descended upon them. The air grew heavy, the silence punctuated by the creaking of rusted metal and the rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. The once vibrant colors of the park had faded to a dull, depressing gray, and the cheerful music that once filled the air was replaced by an eerie silence that pressed in on them. They reached the carousel, its painted horses now chipped and peeling, their eyes staring blankly into the darkness. One of the friends, overcome by a surge of bravado, reached out and spun one of the horses. As it creaked into motion, a faint melody began to play, a haunting tune that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the carousel. The melody grew louder, filling the air with a melancholic waltz that sent shivers down their spines. The carousel horses began to spin on their own, their speed increasing with each passing moment. The friends, mesmerized and terrified, watched as the carousel transformed into a whirling vortex of color and sound. Suddenly, the lights of the park flickered to life, illuminating the grounds with an eerie glow. The Ferris wheel creaked into motion, its carriages spinning wildly, and the roller coaster roared to life, its cars rattling along the rusted tracks. The amusement park, once a place of joy and laughter, had become a macabre spectacle, a symphony of terror conducted by unseen forces. The friends, their hearts pounding in their chests, turned to flee, but the park's exit was nowhere to be found. They were trapped, caught in a nightmarish loop of flashing lights and haunting melodies, their laughter replaced by screams of terror. As the night wore on, the amusement park's horrors intensified. The ghostly laughter grew louder, the spectral figures more menacing, and the rides spun with a ferocity that defied the laws of physics. The friends, their sanity hanging by a thread, realized they had stumbled into a realm where the boundaries between reality and nightmare had dissolved. The abandoned amusement park, once a place of childhood dreams, had become a prison of terror, a place where laughter was swallowed by the darkness and joy was replaced by fear. The friends, their spirits broken and their minds shattered, were left to wander the endless night, forever trapped in the amusement park's twisted reality. The old woman lived alone in a small cottage on the edge of the woods. She was known throughout the village for her knowledge of herbal remedies and her uncanny ability to predict the weather. But she was also feared, whispered about as a witch, a woman who consorted with dark forces and practiced forbidden magic. One stormy night, a young traveler, lost and seeking shelter, stumbled upon the old woman's cottage. He knocked timidly on the door, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The door creaked open, revealing the old woman, her face etched with wrinkles and her eyes glowing with an unsettling intensity. She welcomed the traveler inside, offering him warmth and shelter from the storm. He gratefully accepted, his initial fear giving way to curiosity. The cottage was filled with strange herbs and artifacts, the air thick with the scent of incense and ancient magic. As the night wore on, the traveler learned of the old woman's powers, her ability to commune with the spirits of the forest and to harness the forces of nature. He was both fascinated and terrified, drawn to her wisdom, yet repelled by the darkness that seemed to cling to her. The old woman offered to show the traveler a vision of his future, a glimpse into the path that lay before him. He hesitated, torn between his desire for knowledge and his fear of the unknown. But curiosity ultimately prevailed, and he agreed to the old woman's offer. She led him to a darkened room, where a cauldron bubbled over a crackling fire, its contents emitting a strange, ethereal glow. She instructed him to gaze into the cauldron, to focus his mind, and to open his soul to the visions that would emerge. As the traveler gazed into the cauldron, the room around him dissolved, replaced by a swirling vortex of colors and shapes. He saw glimpses of his future, fleeting images of triumphs and tragedies, of love and loss, of life and death. He saw himself growing old, his hair turning silver, and his face etched with the lines of time. He saw himself surrounded by loved ones, their faces filled with joy and sorrow. And finally, he saw himself lying on his deathbed, his body frail and his spirit fading. The traveler emerged from the vision, shaken and disoriented. The old woman smiled knowingly, her eyes twinkling with a mixture of amusement and pity. She had shown him the truth of his existence, the inevitable cycle of life and death that awaited him. The traveler thanked the old woman for her wisdom, his heart filled with a newfound appreciation for the preciousness of life. He left the cottage, the storm having subsided, and continued on his journey, his steps now guided by the visions he had seen. The old woman remained in her cottage, her secrets safe within its walls, her wisdom whispered on the wind, waiting for the next traveler to seek her out. The old lighthouse stood sentinel on a windswept cliff, its beacon a solitary eye watching over the treacherous coastline. For generations, it had guided ships safely to harbor, its light a symbol of hope and safety in the storm-tossed sea. But the lighthouse keeper, a grizzled old man named Elias, harbored a secret, a darkness that lurked within the tower's stone walls. Elias had lived a solitary life, his only companions the crashing waves and the mournful cries of seagulls. Years of isolation had taken their toll, twisting his mind and warping his perception of reality. He had come to believe that the lighthouse was not just a beacon of safety, but a conduit to another world, a realm of shadows and whispers that lay hidden beneath the waves. He spent his nights poring over ancient maritime maps and forbidden texts, searching for clues to the location of this underwater realm. He became convinced that the lighthouse's beacon was not just a light, but a key, a way to unlock the portal and enter this mysterious world. One night, as a storm raged with unprecedented fury, Elias decided to put his theory to the test. He climbed to the top of the lighthouse, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. He adjusted the beacon's lens, focusing its beam on a specific point in the churning sea, a point where, according to his calculations, the portal should lie. As the beacon's intensified light pierced the darkness, the sea responded. The waves grew more violent, crashing against the cliffs with a ferocity that shook the lighthouse to its foundations. A swirling vortex formed in the water, its depths glowing with an eerie, phosphorescent light. Elias, his eyes wide with awe and terror, watched as the vortex grew larger, its pull becoming irresistible. He felt himself being drawn towards it, his body weightless, his mind filled with visions of a submerged world of strange creatures and forgotten civilizations. He stepped towards the edge of the platform, his arms outstretched, ready to embrace the unknown. But as he teetered on the brink, a voice whispered in his ear, a voice that was both ancient and familiar, a voice that warned him of the dangers that lay below. Elias hesitated, his resolve wavering. He glanced back at the lighthouse, its beacon still shining brightly, its light a lifeline to the world he knew. He took a step back from the edge, his body trembling with a mixture of relief and regret. The vortex in the sea began to dissipate, its glow fading as quickly as it had appeared. The storm subsided, the waves calming to a gentle swell. Elias stood on the platform, his heart pounding, his mind reeling from the experience. He had glimpsed the other world, the realm of shadows and whispers, but he had resisted its call. He had chosen to remain in the world of the living, his duty to guide ships safely to harbor, outweighing his desire to explore the unknown. The old lighthouse keeper returned to his solitary existence, his secret safe within the tower's walls. He continued to watch over the treacherous coastline, his beacon a symbol of hope and safety, but his mind would forever be haunted by the vision of the underwater realm, the world that lay just beyond his grasp. The antique doll had been a childhood treasure, a gift from her grandmother. Its porcelain face frozen in a perpetual smile, its glass eyes staring blankly into the distance. But as the years passed, the doll took on a sinister quality, its smile seeming to widen and its eyes following her every move. Sarah, now a young woman, had long since relegated the doll to the attic, its presence too unsettling to bear. But one night, as she lay in bed, unable to sleep, she heard a faint scratching sound coming from the attic door. She dismissed it at first, attributing it to the old house settling. But the scratching persisted, growing louder and more insistent. Curiosity and a growing sense of dread compelled her to investigate. She crept up the attic stairs, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating dust-covered furniture and forgotten treasures. The scratching sound grew louder as she approached the trunk where she had stored the doll. With a hesitant hand, she lifted the trunk's lid, her heart pounding in her chest. The doll lay inside, its porcelain face gleaming in the flashlight beam, its eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. As she reached for the doll, its eyes blinked. Sarah gasped, her hand recoiling as if burned. The doll's head turned, its smile widening into a grotesque grin. And then it spoke. Its voice was a raspy whisper, ancient and chilling, echoing through the attic. It spoke of forgotten magic, of a dark pact made long ago, and of a soul trapped within its porcelain shell. Sarah, paralyzed with fear, watched as the doll climbed out of the trunk, its limbs moving with an unnatural fluidity. It approached her, its eyes burning with a malevolent light, its smile promising untold horrors. She tried to scream, but her voice was caught in her throat, choked by the growing terror. The doll reached out, its porcelain fingers brushing against her skin, sending a shiver of revulsion down her spine. It whispered again, its voice closer now, its words seeping into her mind like poison. It spoke of a ritual, of a sacrifice, and of a fate worse than death. Sarah, her sanity teetering on the brink, realized the truth. The antique doll was not just a toy. It was a vessel, a conduit for a malevolent entity that had been trapped for centuries, waiting for a chance to escape. And now it had found its way back into the world, through her, its chosen victim. The old vinyl record had been a lucky find at a flea market, its cover depicting a psychedelic swirl of colors and strange symbols. Liam, a music enthusiast with a penchant for the obscure, was intrigued by its mysterious origins and the unsettling feeling it evoked. He brought it home, eager to hear the sounds it held. As he placed the needle on the record, a low hum filled the room, followed by a series of distorted sounds and unsettling whispers. Liam, initially intrigued, soon felt a growing sense of unease. The music, if it could be called that, was unlike anything he had ever heard. It was a cacophony of dissonant melodies, jarring rhythms, and unsettling vocalizations that seemed to claw at the edges of his sanity. He tried to take the needle off the record, but his hand wouldn't respond. It was as if an unseen force was compelling him to listen. The music grew louder and more intense, filling the room with a chaotic energy that seemed to vibrate the very walls. Liam felt his mind slipping, his grip on reality loosening with each passing moment. The room around him began to distort, the walls melting and reforming, the furniture twisting into grotesque shapes. He saw visions in the swirling patterns of the wallpaper, faces contorted in agony, landscapes of twisted flesh and bone, and rituals of unspeakable horror. The music intensified, its rhythms pounding in his head, its melodies seeping into his soul, corrupting his very being. Liam, his sanity hanging by a thread, realized the truth. The vinyl record was not just a piece of music. It was a conduit, a gateway to another dimension, a realm of chaos and madness that lay hidden beneath the surface of reality. He had unwittingly opened a portal, and now the forces of chaos were seeping into his world, threatening to consume him and everything he held dear. He struggled against the music's influence, his mind rebelling against the onslaught of disturbing imagery and unsettling sounds. But the music was relentless, its power growing stronger with each passing moment. Liam felt himself slipping away, his consciousness dissolving into the swirling vortex of chaos. He screamed, his voice lost in the cacophony of sound, his body writhing in the grip of the unseen forces. And then, as suddenly as it began, the music stopped. The room snapped back into focus, the walls and furniture returning to their normal shapes. Liam collapsed to the floor, his body trembling, his mind reeling from the experience. He had glimpsed the abyss, the realm of chaos and madness, and he had barely escaped with his sanity intact. The vinyl record, a relic of a forgotten evil, lay silent on the turntable, its power dormant, but not extinguished. Liam, forever scarred by the experience, vowed never to play the record again, its haunting melodies and disturbing visions forever etched in his memory. The old camera had been a relic of a bygone era, its leather case worn and cracked, its lens clouded with age. Alice, a budding photographer with a fascination for the past, had found it in a dusty antique shop, drawn to its vintage charm and the mystery it held. She eagerly loaded it with film, excited to capture the world through its antique lens. But as she developed the first roll, she discovered something unsettling. The photographs were not of the scenes she had captured. Instead, they were images of another time, another place, another reality. There were photographs of people she didn't recognize, dressed in clothes from a different era, their faces etched with expressions of joy and sorrow, fear and wonder. There were landscapes that seemed both familiar and alien, twisted versions of places she thought she knew. Alice, initially intrigued, soon became obsessed with the camera, its ability to capture images from another reality both fascinating and terrifying. She spent hours photographing everything she could, hoping to unravel the mystery of the camera's origins and the world it revealed. But as she delved deeper into the camera's secrets, she began to notice something disturbing. The images were not just snapshots of another reality. They were changing her reality. The people in the photographs began to appear in her dreams, their faces haunting her waking hours. The landscapes she had captured started to bleed into her own world, familiar streets and buildings taking on a strange, distorted quality. Alice, her grip on reality slipping, realized the truth. The camera was not just a window to another world. It was a bridge, a conduit that was slowly merging her reality with the one she had captured on film. She tried to destroy the camera to break the connection, but it was no use. The camera was indestructible, its power growing stronger with each passing day. Alice, trapped in a world that was both familiar and alien, was forced to watch as her reality unraveled, replaced by the one she had captured through the lens of the antique camera. The lines between worlds blurred, the boundaries of time and space dissolving into a chaotic vortex. Alice, her sanity hanging by a thread, was left to wander a reality that was no longer her own, a prisoner of the camera and the world it had revealed. The old radio had been a family heirloom, passed down from generation to generation, its wooden casing scratched and worn, its knobs and dials tarnished with age. Daniel, a lover of vintage technology, had always been fascinated by the radio and its ability to connect him to the world beyond his small town. But one night as he tuned the dial, searching for his favorite late-night program, he stumbled upon something strange. A faint signal, barely audible above the static, whispering in a language he didn't recognize. Intrigued, he adjusted the tuning, straining to decipher the mysterious broadcast. The whispers grew louder, morphing into a series of guttural voices, chanting in unison, their tone both mesmerizing and unsettling. Daniel, his curiosity piqued, continued to listen, the voices seeping into his mind, their rhythm pulsing in his veins. He felt a strange pull towards the radio, a compulsion to understand the message it conveyed. As the night wore on, the chanting intensified, the voices growing louder and more insistent. Daniel felt his grip on reality loosening, his senses heightened, and his perception of the world around him shifting. The room seemed to warp and distort, the walls closing in, and the furniture taking on strange, organic shapes. He saw shadows dancing in the corners of his eyes, figures flitting just beyond his vision, their whispers echoing in his ears. Daniel, his sanity teetering on the brink, realized the truth. The old radio was not just a receiver of broadcasts. It was a conduit, a gateway to another dimension, a realm of shadows and whispers that lay hidden beneath the surface of reality. He had unwittingly tuned into a frequency that should have remained untouched, a channel that connected him to a world of ancient beings and forgotten powers. The voices he heard were not human, but something older, something more primal, something that sought to enter his world and claim him as its own. Daniel, his mind reeling, tried to turn off the radio to break the connection, but it was no use. The voices held him captive, their chanting growing louder, their power seeping into his very soul. He felt himself being pulled towards the radio, his body dissolving, his consciousness merging with the whispers. The room around him dissolved into a swirling vortex of colors and shapes, the voices now a deafening roar that consumed him entirely. Daniel, his identity fading, his humanity slipping away, was drawn into the radio's depths, becoming one with the whispers, a prisoner of the dimension he had unwittingly unleashed. The old video game cartridge had been a relic from his childhood, a forgotten treasure unearthed from the depths of his attic. Michael, a nostalgic gamer with a fondness for retro technology, was excited to relive the adventures of his youth. He dusted off his old console, blew into the cartridge, a ritual as old as gaming itself, and slotted it in. The familiar loading screen appeared, but something was different. The colors were distorted, the music was off-key, and a strange static flickered across the screen. Michael, initially dismissing it as a glitch, pressed start. The game world loaded, but it was not the one he remembered. The familiar landscapes were twisted and corrupted, the cheerful music replaced by an unsettling soundtrack of distorted melodies and eerie whispers. The non-player characters, once friendly and helpful, now spoke in cryptic riddles and unsettling pronouncements. Their pixelated faces seemed to contort into grotesque expressions, their eyes following his every move with a malevolent intensity. Michael, his curiosity piqued, continued to play, venturing deeper into the corrupted game world. He soon discovered that the game's objectives had changed. Instead of rescuing the princess or defeating the evil wizard, he was now tasked with completing a series of disturbing challenges, each more unsettling than the last. He was forced to navigate mazes of flesh and bone, solve puzzles that involved sacrificing virtual lives, and battle creatures that seemed to embody his deepest fears. The game, once a source of innocent entertainment, had become a twisted reflection of his subconscious, a nightmarish world that fed on his anxieties and insecurities. Michael, his grip on reality slipping, realized the truth. The old video game cartridge was not just a game. It was a conduit, a gateway to a digital dimension where the boundaries between the virtual and the real were blurred. He had unwittingly opened a portal to a world of corrupted code and malevolent entities, a world that sought to consume him and drag him into its digital depths. He tried to turn off the console to escape the game's grasp, but it was no use. The game had taken control, its power growing stronger with each passing moment. Michael, trapped in a digital nightmare, was forced to continue playing, his every action dictated by the game's twisted logic. He battled monstrous creatures, solved disturbing puzzles, and sacrificed virtual lives, all in a desperate attempt to escape the corrupted game world and return to reality. But the game was relentless, its grip on him tightening with each passing level. Michael, his sanity hanging by a thread, his body and mind merging with the digital world, was losing the battle for his soul. The old video game cartridge, a relic of his childhood, had become his prison, a digital hell from which there seemed to be no escape. He had unwittingly tuned into a frequency that should have remained untouched, a channel that connected him to a world of ancient beings and forgotten powers. The voices he heard were not human, but something older, something more primal, something that sought to enter his world and claim him as its own. Daniel, his mind reeling, tried to turn off the radio to break the connection, but it was no use. The voices held him captive, their chanting growing louder, their power seeping into his very soul. He felt himself being pulled towards the radio, his body dissolving, his consciousness merging with the whispers. The room around him dissolved into a swirling vortex of colors and shapes, the voices now a deafening roar that consumed him entirely. Daniel, his identity fading, his humanity slipping away, was drawn into the radio's depths, becoming one with the whispers, a prisoner of the dimension he had unwittingly unleashed.